Welcome to This Week in the PNFL. I'm your host, Mark Hill, and along for the ride, as they always do, are my two favorite co-hosts, Mitch Grawl and Dean Chambers. How are you doing on March Madness, gentlemen?
Very good.
Fantastic.
All
Who
right.
needs who needs college basketball though, Mark, when we are, turning the corner with the 2042 PNFL season in sight. I don't need no college basketball. I've got football on the mind.
Exactly. I have football on the mind. I mean, I'm dealing with the XFL in the real world. I'm dealing with PNFL on the virtual side, and soon after that, we got USFL kicking in right after. So we got three good leagues that's kicking off. Would you agree with that, gentlemen?
Yeah, well, who are y'all's XFL teams? I'm kind of digging those Battlehawks from St. Louis. I don't know what you guys know.
I don't know. Dean, who do you have? What are you looking at?
I'm gonna have to look. I haven't looked. Who's playing? I haven't looked at
Well,
it much.
you have the Seattle. You have Seattle. What are they?
Just say the Roughnecks.
Well, you have
Team.
Seattle. What is theirs? They're the Sea Dragons. You
Yeah.
have Houston
Orlando.
Roughnecks.
Yeah.
You have Arlington Renegades. You have the San Antonio Brahmas. DC, Washington DC
Defenders.
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 Let me see this.
Orlando Vipers. I think.
Orlando. No, that's the Vegas Vipers.
I don't know who the heck they are.
Yeah,
I
it's the
just
Vegas
know that
Vipers. I
I
think
go
it's
for the.
Orlando
I just go for
Predators. A
St.
minute.
Louis.
Yeah, yeah.
I just root for St. Louis because they seem to play with heart. So.
I'm a Seattle guy,
Yeah,
so I gotta lean. But then again, I grew up in Texas, so I like San Antonio. I like Houston. I grew up like about an hour outside of Houston. Anything that's Arlington and Dallas. Growing up growing up there in the '70s and in the '80s, there was nothing better than watching the Cowboys just lose. And there
yeah.
was nothing better than watching the Oilers lose. I grew up as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan living in Texas.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, there still isn't much better than watching Dallas Cowboys lose.
Yes,
Even
I know. How about them Cowboys? They just lost Ezekiel Elliott, or they cut him. So, all right. I think we've kind of went off on the rails a little bit. Anyway, so we have for the coaches out there, and for those that are listening in, we've just completed our draft. Draft was completed. We completed our practice squad. Actually, let me back up. We did our draft. We completed our training camp. Those are done. We've cut players that need to be cut. We've signed contracts. What am I missing, gentlemen? We're
I
getting our.
think right now we're just working on those practice squads, and it'll be time to get the season started.
Okay, so we got the practice squad. So, what we're going to do on this show for you guys today, we're going to talk about, we'll probably brush up again or kind of put a bow on post draft rankings, talk a little bit about practice squad, roster management in the first segment. Second segment, we're going to do some way too early crystal ball predictions. So, we're going to go with both of those. I'm going to have Mitch and Dean kind of kick some things out. I'm just gonna sit back like I always try to do to kind of keep the ship on course. So let's start with in the first segment. We're gonna try to keep it around 15 minutes or so for all three of these. So let's talk about the final bow on the post draft rankings as we talked about pre-show. So. Take a couple minutes on both of those, each one of you guys, to talk about that. Anyone,
Well,
don't be shy.
I'll just say that the one thing about those post training camp rankings, and I'll talk more about this maybe in my crystal ball segment, but it's interesting how there are some teams that when you kind of look at their, supposed roster strength, that their roster strength is one-sided on one side of the ball, meaning that there's a few teams that have a lot of green in the offensive side of the ball and not so much on the defense, and then vice versa. I would say that was probably the interesting thing to me coming out of training camp for sure.
I think one thing I'm seeing that's interesting is kind of look at the two extremes. On one end, we're looking at Las Vegas and Detroit that are much younger and have a lot more younger players, including rookies that they drafted over the last couple of seasons. And I think it illustrates how close overall our talent level is on teams from top to bottom. Because when I look at those two teams, perhaps a little bit more so Las Vegas, I think that team can play well even with all those young players. The other extreme, of course, is are the Chargers and the Cardinals that are loaded with veteran players pretty much to the max. And they're very solid teams all around, and a lot of veteran players, including some guys that are playing their last season with those, with the red status in the contract file. And but you would think that I called them extremes, but when you look at them in comparison, the the range is kind of narrow because that's the way our talent level overall in the league is. That there's a great deal of parity in talent level, and that's interesting too.
So, do you think that with a lot of the knowledge that's been put out there, and from what I was able to detect, is that the coaches have definitely taken a lot more care this off season than in previous off seasons to really focus on their rosters and focus on the draft, and then really, I think with a lot of additional tools, I think there was. Charlie put out Richard put out either Richard or Charlie put out the little format tablet for when you do your training camp. You could plug your numbers in, and it would actually break that down as far as if you put 15% in on one item and 20, 25, 30, so on and so forth. It kind of helped them out a little bit, some additional tools. So do you think those tools help them out a little bit to kind of make it a little bit more on paper? It looks a little bit more challenging this season coming up?
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that helped for sure. To me, I know some of you all listening, we were kind of chatting about this via email when the draft was going on. For probably several different reasons. I don't necessarily know which one more than the other. I think people just drafted a lot smarter this year. To Dean's point, I mean, there's a very thin line in between players and their talent. So, I mean, it's kind of like we're drafting a pool of all stars, if you will, based on our rating scale, but still somebody has to be the highest, somebody has to be the lowest. But I think people did a much smarter draft, and I based that on in running some of my calculations in the past draft or two. There were a lot more first and second round grade players available in rounds 4 and 5, in previous seasons than they were this year. I mean, I don't know if I'd have had anybody a grade or second or first round grade, that anyone that low in this draft. So at least based how I look at players, I think we're drafted smarter based on more educated, going in the draft or what. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I've seen.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think this draft pool was very interesting. The way the rookies were created, and in some positions there was some pretty good depth. So I think even in the positions, there were easily a handful of players that different general managers could debate which one is really the best, and people had different views about that. And I think with this draft pool, more than I think some in the past, there were really a number of different players that really satisfy with what team owners are looking for. So I think most of the team owners did very well in scouting the draft and being prepared for the draft. So I think it went very well for most of us.
Well, with that, I think with the draft, it went real well. But um, how do you think that's going to impact the teams, the 18 teams on their practice squads? Because even though some teams that was over their limit, because you got to kind of narrow it down, so there's going to be players that are going to cut. There's going to be players going to put on the practice squad. And I think throughout the years, for me, for example, I really didn't dabble too much in looking at other teams' practice squads as far as trying to pull someone out their practice squads. But with the way the draft went this season or during the off season and the training camp and the numbers being much higher and having more teams that have quality players that they need to have on their active roster, but in addition, they have quality players on their practice squad. How do you think that's going to it's going to affect the practice squads? Or you think they're going to be a bunch of teams looking at it more so than in previous seasons to say, hey, wait a minute, I can improve my roster if I pull players from Washington or Chicago or Atlanta or Vegas? So, how do you think that's going to work out from what you guys have seen so far this offseason?
I think it's going to be much more active this season. I think teams are having to face tough choices. Do you put a veteran player, since 3 of them are allowed now, or do you put the rookies or younger players? And as a result of that, I think some teams are going to be poaching practice squads much more than the past. It's almost like this round of practice squad signing is almost going to be like another round of free agent signing. And I think that's going to be much more so true than it has been in the past. The past is just a few bits here and there. We may see several this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been updating my roster management file, and I mean, not everybody on the practice squad is a gem, okay? But I mean, there is a reason why they're on the practice squad. But I would say there is some talent available on the practice squads as we speak right now at 9:24 Eastern on a Thursday night. Um, that's probably better than what we had in the free agent pool before the draft. And so if you're looking for certain positions, I'm not going to say because I don't want those coaches to scream at me later. But there are certain positions where there is some, I would say, some strong talent that could probably be a number 2 or player on some rosters out there, if not a 3 in some of these positions where you need multiple players active on your roster. So,
And there are some teams that have lots of points to spend bidding on them.
yeah, I'm thinking teams like, I don't know, Seattle that's got a lot of points to spend that might be looking to upgrade some
Not so
spots on their
loud. Not so
roster.
loud. Not so
Might want to
loud.
go shopping in the
Don't want to let too many
practice
people know
squad.
about that. Don't let too many
But
people
anyway,
know about that now.
but no, I think the having the 3 players, the veteran players, if you will, for the practice squad. I know for me that changed how I went about my practice squads, because normally I would have been like, all right, who are the players that, you know, I have a certain limit of players on positions I like to carry. And if I want to carry 7 wide receivers, I'd go, all right, well, who's my 8th one? All right, you're on the practice squad. Well, this year, quite honestly, I factored in, do I want age over beauty, I guess, if you will, and probably put a couple of these older players that, if somebody wants them, I'd rather them go after those guys who aren't going to be around, much longer, versus someone I hope to have on my team for the next 6, 7+ seasons. So
Yes, and I wanted to make a comment about the roster management aspect of it as it regards practice squad. Because when you think about it, there's usually a purpose you put a player on the practice squad is going to replace someone that retires at the end of the year or his future development or whatever. And the one thing that I tried to address in adjusting my approach as a general manager is At the end of last season, I had 63 players in roster, so I had to cut, maybe it was 62. I had to cut like 89 players from the roster to narrow down to 53. And some of those are guys I wanted to hang on to, but I just didn't have roster spots for them. So I think that's something we need to kind of plan forward for when we're deciding how many players to carry in practice squad, how many of those players you're going to end up losing and cutting, because that's a loss of talent. It's talent you drafted or signed as free agents or traded for in some cases. So what I've tried to do more so than a lot of teams is try to have fewer players in the roster in general, and therefore I don't have to put as many in practice squad and don't have to, because this year I only have one player in red that will retire at the end of the season, and I have one player in practice squad. So the end of the season will be easy for me to narrow down to 53 players. Some of the teams are loaded with 58, 59, as much as 60, many as 63 players. And they may have some tough choices to make at the end of the season.
You're right, Dean. And I think about when I first got back into the league, previous leagues I had been in didn't have a practice squad type of, I guess, feature to their roster management. If they did, I sure as heck didn't remember it. And I will say that I was one that always, well, hey, let me get these 10 players from a practice squad, trying to treat it almost like my farm club, right? Well,
Right.
I would go and I'd spend some points on some of these, 1-year veterans that had high potentials, thinking, well, I'll just put them on my practice squad. For whatever reason, maybe I just didn't do a good job with that. That never really seemed to pan out for me. And I'd always, like you said, Dean, I'd always end up in a season or two. All right, crap. Well, I got to cut down, and this guy is not ready to play yet, but I've already spent a point or two to get him on my roster to develop him, and he can't develop fast enough. And I've probably lost points that I shouldn't have spent because I'm just thinking, I'll just use my practice squad as my farm team. And I think I've had a few that worked out, but as a whole, probably not as. I've probably lost money on that more than I've gained.
Because then at the end of the season, you realize you can't keep them.
Yeah.
You don't have 8 or 9 players retiring, so you can't keep them. You have to make choices, and you may some of them back for 1 point in free agency, or you may not. And to me, it seemed like lost talent that was wasted. Like you said, if it's points that you bet on them, you wasted points. If you traded for them, you wasted what you traded to get them, or it's draft picks. It's even if it's like 7th round draft picks, you draft a guy and then you end up cutting him at the end of the season. It's a waste.
Yeah, and I kind of use this thought process now of, okay, if this guy's been sitting out here in the free agent pool for a season, and no one else has had him, why do I want this guy that bad? So it's I kind of put that thought process on my head, and that along with, okay, is this somebody from training camps? If I'm buying him basically to develop him, can he develop in 2 seasons to where he will be an active player? Am I wrong? If not, I don't make the move, because, like I said, you'll end up, as Dean said, you'll end up having to cut him, and you're gonna go, crap, I could have saved that point and probably signed somebody to a longer contract.
Right. And in addition to that question, will they develop fast enough to be useful? Will they develop fast enough to be valuable enough to be one of your 53 players that you keep on the roster when you have to cut down at the end of the season?
Yeah.
That's ultimately what the final decision is.
And you're also going to have other teams that are going to be sitting there looking at that and saying, well, heck, I'm struggling on this end, so I can kind of snatch him up because this guy doesn't have room on his roster. So what's he going to do? I can go ahead and put in a bid for this guy. Either they're going to have to drop someone else they feel is more important, or I can just get this guy for basically, for a couple points and that's it.
Right. And when I look at how many players are being carried by most teams in practice squad, or will be if they haven't done the practice squad yet, it looks to me like we have 18 teams in the league, and we have enough what I'll call adequate talent. The guys that are worth signing for a point in free agency or a couple points. We have enough adequate talent to probably populate 20 or maybe even 22 teams. So there's like a surplus of overall talent. I'm not talking about the best talent, but at least talent that's good enough to keep on a roster.
Yeah, pretty much like a new team coming into the league, like an expansion roster. Hey, here's some guys picked from this. They can actually, not that it, I mean, it may, that team may cause some excitement, but if not, at least you can field a competitive team based off of what's on the practice roster for some of the teams. Would you agree?
Yes. I mean, I like the free agent pool near the end of last season, and I imagine, what if we added an expansion team and someone like Rich just had to build a team entirely from the free agents? You know, how viable it would be, and it wouldn't be as bad as you'd think, and it would be a roster that you could rebuild in a few seasons with trades and draft picks.
Yeah.
That kind of opens up another section too, because I know that there was some discussion, and then we can go ahead and pivot off to another section. But I know that there was some teams, actually some coaches out there that wanted to join the league, but we didn't expand the league. I know that there was some conversations between Rich and Charlie, should they do it or not. Even though we're getting more interest into the league again, they just wanted to hold off for a while. So that would be something that I personally would like to see, add more competition. And like you guys were saying with the practice squad, that kind of opens it up to where if we need to dump players into the pool, there's plenty of talent that's out there. Maybe not the top tier, your tier one. Maybe there may be some tier one, but definitely some tier two players that can actually make some noise if they want to go with expansion. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's one other option that we could do if Steve or someone else is willing to run it again, or a couple of people willing to create a committee and kind of run it, is if we had a college league in place again, some of us would coach a team in both leagues, but the new people like on the waiting list, they could grab a team in that league and be working on that while they wait for an available PNFL team. That's an option too, and that's kind of like an intermediary step. You get to the point where the college league was filled up and we had like 6 or 7 people in that league really active in and wanting a PNFL team, then expansion would be more viable.
So basically what you're saying is if we start off a PXFL as our developmental league for coaches, we can use that to keep them on hold until an opening comes.
And recruit more coaches as well.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
I don't think we would consider seriously. I can say that correctly. I don't think we would seriously consider expanding the league unless we had 10 plus serious people on a waiting list. Because I think from a structure standpoint, we're 18 teams now. If we wanted to increase I think we have to go from 18 to 28, just based on the structure. Does that sound right, Dean?
Yes, and I think
I thought it was 24.
No, I think it's 28. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's 28. The route to getting to that point is to have that kind of league, either college league or like a PXFL, as you said, as a place where they could coach and manage a team in the meantime while they're waiting for. So if you had like a 10-team league and all those teams are filled up and very active, and then at some point those 10 could be like kind of merged into PNFL teams, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an exciting possibility. It's just, it depends on what the interest is, and like I said, I know there's a waiting list out there, but obviously Charlie and Richard would know much more about it than we do. So would I like to see the league expanded? Yes, but definitely you want to make sure that it's expanded to a way where it makes for better competition, not just some teams that are just going to be phoning it in, I guess.
There you go. We could start an 18 PXFL to help with these recruiting of new coaches, and we can also experiment with wider ratings spreads and see how that impacts the stats.
Hey, that sounds interesting. Okay, hey, Charlie and Rich, we're putting some suggestions in the suggestion box, gentlemen.
And if that got filled up and was active, you'd have 18 plus 8, a total of 26. A 28-team league with just 2 CPU teams would be very strong.
Yeah, especially if Jerry's making the CPU.
Really? You want to bring the Headless Horseman back You want to bring
Yeah,
two
we
of them back, really?
put them in the NFC Central or something.
No, put them out in the AFC West.
Oh, geez.
All right, so we're gonna put a pin in that one
Man,
for a little
we are
bit.
like completely into left field from what we were going to talk about tonight.
Yes, we're a little bit out there. So, actually, we got about 15 minutes left or so. Well, we try to keep it to 35 minutes, guys. I think we might have hit that mark once. So, actually, what I want to do is take the second segment that we were going to do, and I'm going to take the last item from the first segment that we kind of got off on and combine it in two. So let's talk about the roster management and crystal ball predictions, if we can tie both of those in. We can probably talk a little bit about the roster management, but then go into the crystal ball predictions. So I'm going to open it up to both of you guys to kind of put a final bow on the roster management first. So either one of you guys can take that.
Dean, I think I've said all about I've got to say about the roster management, so I'll let you finish that one off.
Yeah, I think part of it you can look at the draft rankings that you did, and some of the teams did very well. I think most of the teams did fairly well, but I think at this point we can look at the predictions of the season. I'm going to start with some ideas about the AFC West. I think that as far as who wins the division, it's definitely going to be a competition between the Chargers and now the Chiefs. Your team used to be the Raiders. I think your teams are going to compete for it. We have you're predicting that Barney at Minnesota is going to make a big comeback this season. That is possible. And then we have two new coaches in the league, Pittsburgh and Las Vegas, and they're really wild cards. We don't know what to expect from them, especially Pittsburgh, who hasn't coached a team in the PNFL yet. AFC East, I think, is still going to be all the Jets. You just see what Jacksonville and Indianapolis does to improve. New England got the wild card spot, and I'm not sure they'll get the wild card spot. If Minnesota is back in the playoffs, that may cost New England that spot. I can comment on the NFC, but I'll let Mitch do that first.
All right. When I look at the NFC, I think the NFC West is going to be a log jam. Well, I say that if New Orleans is able to sustain the success and build on the success they had last year, I see the NFC West just being a complete log jam with Chicago, New Orleans. I think San Francisco there last year started getting some things put together, kind of stubbed their toe there those I think that last week of the season. But I think that could be a log jam there in the NFC West, especially if Anaheim, who, had a nice, a solid season, some ups and downs. And, you never know about Seattle. They might, they might jump up there and surprise some folks. So I think NFC West is going to be interesting. NFC East, right now, I would say Washington is the front runner there, and it really depends on you, Dean. It's either going to be Washington and Atlanta, I think, battling it out, or it's going to be Washington and then like a three-headed scramble for second between Detroit, the Giants, and Atlanta. And so I will say this: looking at some of the rosters out there, Washington and in Chicago, I think have the most balanced rosters as far as talent, both offensively and defensively, compared, based on my rankings. Los Angeles and the Jets. Oh my gosh! Based on my talent rankings, I don't know if anyone's going to score any points against Los Angeles and the Jets this year. Their defenses look to be loaded for sure. And we're going to talk about the AFC. So I'm going to say I agree with you, Dean, as far as the AFC goes. I think the Jets right now are the class of the division. They might shut out, half their AFC East games this year. And I think that AFC West, I think it'll be, me, Barney, and Steve, beating the crap out of each other like we normally do. And I think these new coaches that we've got there in the West, just based on how they're engaged with their roster management. I wouldn't be surprised if they're sneaky good. This first year, we'll see. It's tough. Those first couple of seasons with PPPs in the league, but I think it'll be fun. It's going to be fun.
I would say regarding the NFC, I would say that Chicago is still favored in the NFC West, but I think there'll be opportunities for Anaheim to win games. The Saints are going to win some games. Seattle is in there, and it may prove to be very challenging for Charlie with San Francisco. I mean, he's done well some seasons, but it looks to me like he has much more competition in the division. The NFC West, I mean the NFC East rather. Yeah, I can see where many will consider Washington the favorite. I think for my team, as opposed to last year being kind of the scrappy upstart of the division, I think the challenge is to see whether my team is going to play like defending NFC champions and win some of those games. That we'll see. Detroit is still rebuilding, and the Giants. Sean is trying to emphasize establishing his running game this season, and that may help him out. So, could be very competitive just the same. I think the three divisions that will be more competitive, every one of them except for the AFC East.
Yeah,
where the Jets are going to dominate.
Well, the good thing, Dean, I think what gives you a chance this season to get back to that to into the playoffs and beyond is you got rid of that cancer Justin Fields. You got rid of Fields, so I think everything's going to be smooth sailing from now on. Just poking at you there, Dean.
Well, I just something more important than that. Maybe a lot of you don't realize. My roster is starting to get a bit old, especially going a season with no draft picks at all after making the big trade with James. So I traded back into the draft and ended up getting 6 very solid quality rookies, and it actually lowered my overall team age a bit. So I think that has my roster moving in the right direction. Our draft picks next year will do more trades and probably trade up a bit, and I think my team would be going in the right direction now after the big trade, which did help. It did strengthen my roster to make that big trade with Detroit.
Well, you did increase, I think, the skill level of your lines, both offensively and defensively. So we'll see how that impacts the new quarterback and probably the running game, because you've always had a solid running game there, and your guards and tackles, at least in my PNFL news rankings, they're in the top 5, and your defensive ends are top 5. So, we'll see. Maybe it's going to be a different style of Atlanta this year.
Well, Barry J. Sanders is back to try to get his 1,000 yards again, and Benny Snell Jr. is right behind him, and he wants his playing time, and he wants to, get some rushing yards in. So it's going to be a challenge to get everyone yards rushing and receiving yards and make the offense run effectively.
Well, I'll tell you, Kansas City, we're going to see how well these my rating scale on receivers go, because I'm going to have 6 wide receivers, and 3 of them are going to have speed ratings below 82. So, y'all either be laughing at me and how I grade out my wide receivers, or suddenly we're going to have strong, great hands wide receivers all around the league here in the next couple of seasons. I don't know. Mark, what do you think? What's your crystal ball saying about this season?
Well, I think what I'm looking at right now from my crystal ball, you guys talked about a lot of teams that can be some new coaches coming into the league, and seeing some movement with some of the older coaches that's been in the league for a while. I'll pick on my team for a little bit. I think that with the path that I'm predicting in my mindset, I think Seattle will be more competitive, which, we took a step back and now we need to go ahead and kind of update it a little bit more. You have the new coaches coming in, and I think that those guys are going to be the wild card to see how they are going to fit into the league and what they're going to bring to the table. I think the veteran coaches, the top tier veteran coaches, will definitely have to do some additional work to counteract these guys because, when you play someone in the league for so many years or so many seasons, you know what to expect. You have two coaches coming in, on the AFC West, and I think the other coaches in the NFC side. You don't know what to expect from these guys, so they can definitely upset the apple cart, and you guys kind of figure out how are you going to kind of prepare for these guys and kind of feel them out a little bit. So that's something that you guys got to kind of, the coaches have to kind of look at. I think with the draft, the way the draft fell, the training camp fell, a lot of the trades, free agent signings, I think all of that will kind of play in to the overall competition in the league. I think that you have, even though you may have someone with the good stat numbers, it all comes down to the PPPs and the plays. Picking your plays and your profiles. So I think at the end of the day, you can have someone with the high stat numbers, their attributes, but it's going to come down to the play calling. And if you don't properly plan, put your playbook together and your coaching profile, it doesn't matter how high of a number you have. You could be listed overall ranked number 1, not picking on Chicago, but you can have the high number up there. But if your plays and profiles aren't up to par, it doesn't matter how good. You can have 99s across the board or some high numbers across the board, but if you're not planning it out properly, you're going to lose out. So I look at the stats as far as the pre-camp and post-camp numbers, and I see where my team ranks versus the other teams in the league. But again, it falls back to how are you game planning? And I think that is going to be the big variable that is going to take probably 3 or 4 games for the coaches, the top tier coach in the league, to kind of fill out. I think the first week of the season, coaches are going to be on their heels trying to figure out what am I going against, especially when it comes to the new teams. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so much. It's mostly coming down to the game plans and the profiles. And I started working on my week 1, and it's interesting. You start to put together the game plan, and you go by the data that you're looking at. And sometimes it's a surprise. Oh, that play is going to be effective against them this week. Sometimes there's real surprises there, and it may end up looking very different than what you expected when you actually put together the game plan you're going to use for this coming week. That's what makes the biggest difference, because our differences in roster talent from team to team and position to position is so narrow. How well we do on the game plans and profiles makes all the difference.
Yeah, I agree on that, and I think that that is something that I kind of wonder if that should be a topic that we should discuss prior to the start of the season or for next week's show. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because on one side, we could kind of help the coaches out to have better competition in the league. But then on the flip side, if we do this, it could kind of backfire on us. So what do you guys think about it, Mitch?
Well, I will be in Minnesota next week for business. So if y'all want to do that without me next week, feel free. But no, I mean, here's the thing, right? I've got a process that I go about building out my plans, and I mean, I'm pretty open, and or I'd be very happy to kind of share. I probably put more time into it, or than probably some others would want to. I'm always, it's all about execution, right? And even if we use a similar process, I'm probably going to execute it differently than others. But if people need some ideas on how to improve their game planning, I mean, shoot, I think it makes the league better. I'm always open to share.
Well, I think the one thing you don't want to be in position of doing is if someone asks you as a coach, well, what do you think about your players' execution today? And you say, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, yeah, they're. I prefer them to block.
You don't want to be like the Tampa Bay coach who said, well, we didn't block very well today, and we made up for it by not tackling very well.
There
That's
you
right.
go. That'll
Right.
work.
Yeah, that's right. Uh,
All right. So,
but no, but to answer your question, I'm pretty much an open book, probably to my detriment. So anything we can do to help the league be more to be better, competitive, and keep people interested. I hate people maybe not, maybe missing out on some simple things they could do to feel more engaged in the game and feel maybe leave or quit or become disengaged, and because they're all we got to do is just kind of redirect them a little bit. And not that I want to start losing a bunch of games, but I like having a full league with coaches that are active. So anything we can do to keep that going, I'm in favor of it.
That's right.
oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. So, and again, obviously we're not going to give all the tips and tricks and everything that you do, but if you can kind of help point them in the right direction, that would be a good thing. So, something to look at. So, as we come to wrap up this show, I just want to thank you guys for tuning in and listening to the show. Obviously, I think we're going to kind of open it up. I think we mentioned it a time or two, but I kind of want to expand it that we're getting ready for the start of the week 1. If you guys have any questions for Mitch or for Dean, definitely post it in the forum or basically put it in the group email. And I think going into next week, we can try to answer some of those questions. It doesn't matter if it's the older coaches that's been there or the newer coaches. We haven't even started plotting for the next week's show or for next week's show. So we're kind of open canvas at this point. But if you guys have any questions, definitely let us know, and to try to help you guys out and to make the league a little bit more exciting going into this new season. I think that my 4 seasons, oh my God, it's been 4 seasons in this league. I'm feeling that there's a lot more excitement going into this upcoming season. I don't know if you guys feel it, but I kind of feel it a little bit, and a lot of expectations coming up. So as we come to wind this down, I want to pass it around the table. Dean, is there anything that you want to kind of add to this conversation before we wrap it up?
Yeah, 2 quick points. I think on my team, safety Brian Cook and wide receiver Josh Johnson, I think are going to surprise people as rookies and maybe even be rookie of the year candidates. And good luck to everyone in this season's games.
Okay. Mitch, do you want to go ahead and add anything to this and then take us
Yeah,
home?
sure. I will just say to reinforce what Mark said. If anyone who has any questions or honestly just needs a second set of eyes on something, I know some of y'all have emailed me and asked me some questions or for some advice on things. Feel free to reach out to do that. I'm like I said, I'm more than more than happy. I enjoy helping folks, have fun with the game. And just know that Seattle apparently is going to run a Nebraska wishbone offense with about 7 fullbacks. And with that, Mark, I'll say let's get it.
Quit snitching. Snitches get stitches.